You're with Julian on the Brown Notes, and the decline and fall of Pitchfork magazine, or how going woke really did go broke. And the story of why it's not to do with the conglomerate Conde Nast or Nasty, but the editor-in-chief of the last 5 years, Puja Patel, who is actually, for me, the arguable villain in this piece. If you don't know who Pitchfork are, it's the most important music criticism Bible this century. It's the most important music magazine this century. In the best era for music criticism for me wasn't the likes of Rolling Stone, who have always been quite trite in their music criticism, to be honest. It's the late 80s and early 90s of British music journalism, of the NME, Melody Maker and Sounds. 3 weekly publications which were absolutely superb and really went for it when it came to music criticism. The only rival to that era has been Pitchfork magazine, who arrived, I think, as an online presence back at the end of the 1990s and became synonymous with this pretentious, over-the-top music journalism. And they basically fomented and reported the incredible burst of music from the early 2000s across American alt-rock and indie and more electronic bands coming through, like the Knife and the LCD Sound System, and the re-emergence of much more interesting R&B and rap. And they were brilliant. Even if you disregarded them, they occupied a place where every time their end-of-year polls on their top 50 albums or tracks came out, it was a way of religiously going through with a fine-tooth comb, discovering new music. And back then, I from 2000 to 2010, I would have read every review, even if I didn't care about the artist or the genre. They were important and often mocked, but kind of ground zero for music criticism this century. And Conde Nast bought them out as a ongoing concern, remaining Pitchfork.com or Pitchfork Media as the world's most prominent music publication. And a lot of people are going to blame this on Conde Nast, the big conglomerate that came in and bought them and ended up chewing them out and killing them and changing everything. It's not true. What happened when Conde Nast came in is that they started focusing a lot on people like Beyonce and Drake. And the reason they did that is they get the most clicks. So they're doing, they do Taylor Swift. And my biggest problem then was every single Beyonce article is taking away an alternative music article. That was my problem. But even if you include the relentless focus on much bigger mainstream artists, and the other problem I have is, if I want to read about Beyonce, I can read about her in every single other publication. Pitchfork was an alternative music Bible first. So that was the two problems I had. Is I don't need to read. I want to read about music I'm not hearing about anywhere else in Pitchfork. And focusing on Beyonce and Drake and Taylor Swift isn't doing that. And it's using up space that could be articles on alternative acts that aren't getting focused elsewhere. I do apologise. But they continued. Conde Nast bought them like 10, 15 years ago. They continued for years after that. By 2015, they were still going strong and still occasionally having really good years when it came to their album lists. What changed here is the editor-in-chief of the last 5 years, Puja Patel. And whether it was her fault, whether it was management's fault, I can only ascribe the direction that Pitchfork then took as blaming it on the person in charge. And the most in charge seemed to be Puja Patel as the editor-in-chief. And they basically forgot a large part of their audience. Whether this, and then this gets you called an incel and like alt-right or sexist or whatever, but a large part of alternative music is being made by white straight Anglo men with guitars, whether it's indie music or alt-rock or whether it's more experimental music or metal, a million different kinds of metal. There's an awful lot of that music being made by straight white people with guitars, men, and Pitchfork just turned around and said they didn't care about that music anymore. And what they would focus on was really female solo acts making pop and R&B and being on TikTok in the modern era, and specifically American rap, because a lot of black English music never got any of the acclaim. And you could see it most cleanly when a white boy indie guitar band would come in, and their scoring system out of 10, once it gets to like 8.2 or something, it's best new music. So it's like one of the most awarded of the year. And it seemed like they downvoted. It's almost like they had a company policy of downvoting any white indie straight guitar music down to just below best new music, so it could never get it unless your singer, as with Dry Cleaning and so on, is a woman or Big Thief, and then you can make that kind of music and get best new music. But then they would upvote a lot of mediocre female pop and R&B to 8.3 so that they would give it best new music, and you'd end the year with virtually no focus on what a large core part of their audience listened to. I listened to the music they were ignoring, and I listened to the music that they were focusing on. It's them that changed. They stopped focusing on a vast sphere of alternative music, which was their base. So they became increasingly irrelevant, and people stopped reading their articles. So I used to religiously go through their end-of-year lists as being the most sacrosanct. And now I just don't even bother, because it's just a collection of, mainly female solo pop and R&B acts and the odd American rapper. And then if they begrudgingly give any sort of acclaim to any white boy indie guitar music, it's always like backhanded. I think a really good example of that gulf was the Readers' poll in 2022. My album of the year that year was Ants From Up There by Black Country New Road, joint with Rosalia's Moso Mami, I might add. Now, that was one of the best reviewed albums of the modern era, and they let it scrape in at number 49 in their best albums of the year. But the Readers' poll ranked it the third best album of the year. And to me, that really showed the gulf between the current crop of journalists at Pitchfork and their readership, which is why they lost it, why they lost relevance, why they lost cultural currency. They care more about covering TikTok fads than indie guitar music. And whether you like it or not, alt rock and indie guitar music were their bread and butter, and they stopped caring about it. I kind of call it the post Fetch the Bolt Cutters era. And I think one of the, where they give unbelievable, they basically focus their praise on who makes the music now, and have done for the last 5 years, rather than how good that music is. So they'll sideline you based on your gender or skin color or anything else. And they've even done it to their own. They've eaten their own so often. Some examples would be St. Vincent being a rock chick, indie rock goddess. You would think would be immune to their criticism, but they apply I hate the word woke, but it does seem to really apply to what happened. The last St. Vincent album I saw, they had a massive go at her for using the term 911, the American Emergency Police phone number, because she was a white woman, as though it's a black person's word. And Bad Bunny, in the relentlessly macho world of Latin music, where he's a gender-bending, revolutionary, they had to go at him for not being black enough. They had to go at Rosalia for being only white Spanish. They couldn't help themselves. And I only care about whether music is good or bad. I don't care who made it. But they just didn't convince me that they had any credibility when it came to reviewing music anymore. If it got best new music, it was a very narrow band. The irony was in their relentless push for diversity, which was completely valid, because so much men music was being focused on and rewarding, that they had to right the ship. And back in around 2015, there was a valid push to include far more female music, but they never stopped going. So they ended up ignoring a lot of great music made by men and then focusing on a lot of mediocre music made by women, which isn't how it should be. They never righted the ship. They promoted mediocrity. And a lot of the most important musical acts just got sidelined by them, and they couldn't hide their contempt. So they ended up having a really So they wanted to be really diverse, and they ended up being the most narrow and homogenized music publication. You can look through any other music publications' end-of-year lists and see a much wider variety of music being focused on than they did in Pitchfork, which is the opposite way it should have been. And given Puja Patel has presided over that period where this has happened, I have to blame her and not Conde Nast. So Conde Nast have announced they're going to fold the Pitchfork publication into the GQ magazine. What that means, I've got no idea, but it's an end of an era. The most important music publication for someone like me, who is a relentless consumer of reviews and music criticism and producing myself, it is the most important publication. And they went down a path that they didn't need to so relentlessly. I feel like they alienated a lot of their audience, their core audience. And they just ended up focusing on a narrower and narrower band of music to the exclusion of all else. So I do kind of blame her more than Conde Nast here. I don't know what the future is for Pitchfork, but apparently it's dead, which is terribly sad. But I've been, the last 5 years, I've really not liked Pitchfork, and I kind of blame her. So